live, and you should see it say going live or
Yes,
something
I
on
see
the
it.
Zoom. Oop, I think we're live, Shoshana. It's like kind of a miracle. It's actually worked. So I am so excited tonight because we have, and it's actually 9 o'clock, and I got all my technology out of the way.
Excellent.
So I know it's kind of like amazing. Anyway, this is Shoshana Bulow.
Hi,
I'm
everybody.
I'm so excited. So Shoshana and I are really old friends, and Shoshana was one of my early supervisors. And Shoshana is a couples therapist and a sex therapist, and she's in private practice, but she also teaches. She teaches at the White Institute, and she teaches and she supervises at the White Institute. But she's amazing, and lucky you guys, anybody there. Now you can see people anywhere because everybody's working on Zoom. Has that changed things a lot? Do you feel like the Zoom thing?
It definitely has changed things a lot. At first, I thought it wasn't going to be, I was a little worried about it, but I think it's been fantastic, actually.
Yeah, you want to talk about that? That wasn't what I was going to ask you about, but talk about it.
Sure. First of all, on my end, it's like, eliminated the commute, but I think it's eliminated the commute for everybody. Like an hour of therapy equals an hour of time instead of 45 minutes commuting, the subway, the trying to, whatever.
I know sometimes I feel like people used to get to me and they'd be in this horrible mood before they get started because it took them longer and they were late and they were harried and they were
Right.
pissed off. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
Right. I can't tell you how many times I'd get a text or an email, the train's stuck or something like that. So I think that part has been great. It's kind of interesting to see people, and people see me, I guess, in my home, but me to see people in their home. It's bad when people don't have privacy. Obviously, that's not great. Or when the technology fails. I always
I have clients who call me from the car sometimes. It's like a little, they're in the car and they're like,
I've had that a few times, but I don't feel like it's as successful usually. But
it's distracting.
Yeah, in that way. I just mean like it's not even distracting. The technology sometimes fails. Like it's because like they're out in the woods somewhere, and so
hiding.
But it's been better than I expected, to be honest.
Somebody was telling me recently about a therapist who works off in her bathroom, and she was posting on Instagram. You heard about this, or you just
no?
So she was posting on Instagram about the fact that she sees her clients in the bathroom because that's like the only room in the house that she can get to that has total privacy. So I just was laughing because I'm sure her clients are Instagram posts, right?
It's so funny. I remember in March I gave a webinar at Ackerman. And you know how people like want to identify who they are and, pronouns and whatever, place themselves. And I said, I just want to say, I am wearing pants.
Love that. I'm going to start some of my sessions with that. I love that. Except that I would be lying sometimes.
Exactly. I am wearing pants.
You're very good. I'm not going to make you stand up.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little about couples therapy, because I feel like one of the things is that people are so intimidated about couples therapy. Like they feel like somehow their marriage has to be falling apart. I mean, tell me what you feel, because I feel like people feel like somehow their marriage has to be falling apart before they'll see a freaking couples counselor.
So I think the problem is it doesn't have to be falling apart to see someone. They think that if they see someone that it means their marriage is failing. It's like a little bit of a different, view. So people get nervous about, like, they're making a statement by coming to couples therapy to say, like, something's wrong with our marriage. We can't do this ourselves. We should be able to do it ourselves. So it's just so sad. Sometimes I see people and they tell me what's going on. I'll ask how long it's been going on for, and they say, a decade. It's like, what?
But we're only coming in for 3 sessions.
But we hope that this can be okay within 45 minutes.
Right, exactly.
So no, seriously, it's sad, because a lot of times I think if people would just say, you know what, we've hit a stumbling block, or this is somewhere where we get stuck, or this is, sometimes it's a content area that's hard, or sometimes it's just a dynamic that's hard. And I think being able to say, this is hard for us, why don't we just get help to make this better, is really a sign of strength of the relationship. It's not a sign of failure. So I think that, when people come and like they say to me, like, look, we love each other. We're happily married, but this has been an issue. I'm always like,
no, for sure. It's so funny. I remember talking to somebody in my office who was married maybe 6 months or something, and they were having trouble getting adjusted. And I said, why don't you guys go see a couples counselor? And she looked at me and she was like, oh my God, we've only been married 3 months or 4 months, whatever, or 6 months.
Right.
we have to see a couples counselor. And I'm like, you can't look at it like that. You have to realize that like the couples counselor, you have a lot of adjustments to make. Look at it as somebody who's going to help you with the adjustments, not somebody who's fixing a problem, you know?
You know, I can tell you a funny story. Maybe I shouldn't, but
No, yes, you should.
somebody once came and they'd been together for maybe, I'm going to say 2 months. I mean, it was very, very brief. And so I was thinking like, who, like,
Not married, just together for 2
no,
months.
they just met. Like, and I thought like maybe this isn't a great idea then, you know, like so somebody else calls and says they want to see me, and it was, they needed to eat like an evening hour, the same hour that this couple came, whenever that was. And I said, you know, I think that in a week or two, I'm going to have a spot opening up, because how long was someone who like only knew each other for 4 weeks or 6 weeks going to come see me, right? A year.
Really? How'd they do?
It was just interesting to me that, like, you know, it actually was helpful to them. It was fascinating. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about that, but it was like my assumption was like, why
Yeah.
come so soon? But actually it helped them.
Do you think some of it was that they met each other and they sort of felt like this could work, but we're getting stuck on things, and like we really want, like, in a weird way, it makes a certain amount of sense.
I think so much depends on what's going on in your life and what, you know, what the, you know, I think when people are, you know, in their 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, if it's not right, they like move on. I think if you're either older, or if there's some reason that you feel like, no, this happens all the time, I don't want, you know, like there's different reasons why people might stay, like feel that they want to go into couples therapy earlier on.
Right. So no, I think that, so I'm going to now tell people something which they may not know, which is that a lot of us therapists are scared of couples therapy. Like
Who's scared of couples therapy?
Many of us therapists who do individual counseling, right? So I do a little bit of couples counseling, but not a lot. And couples counseling is intimidating. It's scary. It's really, I think it's a sort of a you need a certain high level of expertise to be a really good couples counselor. So I don't know, can you talk a little bit about like how you see it being different, couples counseling from being individual counseling? I think that would be really interesting for people.
First of all, I have to say I am so energized by couples therapy and family therapy. I love,
and that's why you're so great at it. Okay.
You're so kind. You know, what's different is, first of all, when you talk about whatever you talk about, you walk out of the room with the person you've been, you know, with your partner or with your family member. So in case of couples therapy, with your partner. And it's different than individual therapy, where you can kind of sit with it, mull it over, keep it inside if you want to, share it or not. But you know, whatever you say in couples therapy, you walk out the room with your partner, and so that whatever you said walks out the room too. So so I think that's part of the difference. I think it's also just a really interesting kind of mix of bringing in individual histories and the couple history and family histories, what's happening sometimes in vivo, like in the moment, in the room. Sometimes I just stop it and say like, okay, like let's take a look at what just happened here. You know, like there's just this like constant like dynamic thing going on of always bringing in these different things and always trying to kind of, you know, piece it all together and weave a narrative. It's really amazingly wonderful. I sometimes think it's like a little like driving a car, and when you're first learning, you know, and you're like, oh my God, there's the rear view mirror on the side, and like there's people behind me, and the steering wheel, and the, you know, like the gas and the brake,
and the windshield wiper, right?
So there's just a million things, and then you know, when you do it, it just becomes like this seamless thing that you do, but you really are incorporating all of those things all the time.
So when you do it, it becomes the seamless thing.
Well, I think that when you know, when you get to be my age, I guess. But I'm just saying like that there are all these pieces. And so the reason I'm saying that is not to say, oh, I'm so seamless, but more to say that it really is this kind of amazing process. And all of those things are really kind of being brought into the work.
Right. I think it is much more dynamic than an individual session, and there is so much more going on simultaneously. So I think that's why a lot of therapists find it intimidating, to be honest. And that's why it takes a really unusual person, I think, to be able to do it well. So are there things that you feel like patterns of things people tend to come in with?
Um, I guess what I would say is, that's a good question. I don't necessarily see patterns or content areas. I mean, sometimes I'll have a cluster of a certain content area. Um, but I think that what I see is that when people get stuck somewhere or struggle with something, it's usually because they each have a vulnerability that they're bringing into whatever's happening, and those vulnerabilities are colliding. And so as we understand why is this, what's going on for you and what's going on for you, we start to understand why they're butting heads, or why this is an area where they're getting stuck. So that's a little different, I guess, than a theme, but I guess I'm always
No,
listening.
that is really, can you give an example of like a situation or a case or something that people could kind of latch onto and understand what you mean?
I so wish you could like given me a heads up before, so I could have.
Oh no, it's still totally, no, it's totally fine. If we can move on, we can totally move on. And then it's going to come to you in 5 minutes, and then you're going to come back to it, which is totally fine.
Like this is not a case example, but it could just be, if one person, grew up in a house where there was a lot of screaming, and the way they dealt with it was to sort of like withdraw, and somebody else, in order to get heard, had to shout loud, so like.
That's great. Right.
That would be an example where like their shouting and their withdrawal is just really like, it's a safety strategy for each of them. It was really effective in their lives, growing up, but together the shouting is making, one withdraw, and the withdrawal is making the other shout. So I don't know if that's a great example, but it's like,
that is a great example, I think. So, so the other thing that you do a lot of things, but the other thing that you do also is sex therapy. And, I think people don't always get, and I feel like I spend a lot of time trying to explain to people that not all sex therapy necessarily is couples therapy. And that like when you want a really good sex therapist to deal with the dynamics, you have to have a good couples therapist if you're dealing with a couple in order to do the sex therapy. So,
right.
First of all, can we just talk a little about your trajectory? Like when did you start doing couples? When did you start doing sex therapy? How did that overlap kind of thing?
So, I like to say that I sort of fell into both by accident.
The best things happen by accident.
Best thing. I was in social work school and pretty unhappy. I had 3 little kids, and my second semester I had like the classes were like scheduled, like I just felt like I'm not going to be home. It was bad. I wasn't happy they were all together. And I walked into, they'd given me like some big scholarship to go. And I walk into this woman and I said, am I gonna like lose this scholarship if I like take fewer classes? And she just looked at me, and let me just tell you, it's like, shows you how much empathy is so important. She looked at me and she said, you're really not happy here, are you? And I said, no. I started to cry. So anyway, so she sat down with me and we looked at whatever, and it turned out there was this course that was being offered that I could get into called Human Sexuality. And it met at a time of day, like it just worked out for my schedule. I was like, oh, why not? I'll just take it. And oh my God, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was taught by Candace Risen, who turned into like a mentor and somebody who I just, just think the world of. This is in Cleveland, Ohio. And after like being in the class a couple times, I said, I'd love to have my internship with you guys. And long story short, I ended up getting the internship. They only had 1 spot, and it was a very coveted position. And so that was sort of like the beginning of it. I mean, certainly the road was longer than that, but I never in a million years had thought about sexuality, studying sexuality or sex therapy until I.
What did you love so much about it? Do you remember?
First of all, she was just so smart, and it was such an interesting, it just seemed like such an interesting field. And, like, I think people think like, ooh, sex therapy. And the truth is like just all the different facets of sexuality are just, it's so it's so rich and so deep and so integral to who we are, and so often so shameful for people to talk about, and to be able to have a comfort with language and with concepts and with just with who people are, and you know, there's something about it that is just so powerful. So it's interesting when you're talking about couples therapy and sex therapy. I definitely practice sex therapy, but I often think of myself as a couples therapist who's also just comfortable talking about sex. And it's part of what I teach at White. I've taught it at different workshops in various places to try and help couples therapists gain a comfort talking about sexuality and talking about sex. Because, you know, when a couple comes in like with discrepant desire, it would be great for any couples therapist to feel comfortable asking them questions and helping, like, just like if anything else that they struggle with.
You know, it's so funny because I feel like a little bit this, you're beating a drum that I'm always beating. It makes me enraged. I mean, you and I have talked about this. It enrages me that there are couples therapists out there that are just not comfortable dealing with sex. Like, to my mind, it almost feels like malpractice. Like, when I see, and I do this, when I see a woman and she comes in and she's been in couples therapy for a year with her husband, or 2 years, and I'll be like, they haven't had sex in a year. And I'll be like, well, what does your couples counselor say about this? Like, what have you discussed with her or him? And they'll be like, oh, it never came up. Or I came up and he said, well, we'll fix the relationship and then the sex will follow. Like, I get just so enraged, Shoshana. And I feel like people assume, and I'm assuming that people watching this assume, that a couples counselor will be comfortable. Oh, of course, a couple counselor will be comfortable talking about sex. It's not true.
Right. Unfortunately, I mean, there are some who are, obviously, but there's a lot who aren't. I sometimes think it's like a scene from Annie Hall, where you know, somebody walks in and says, you know, I'm struggling with, you know, we have money issues, I have in-law issues, I have sexual issues, we fight a lot, we whatever, and like underneath, like, they just throw in the thing about sex, and underneath it's like, are you comfortable talking about sex? That's like that's the subtitle. And the therapist says, like, well, it sounds like, you know, there's a lot of issues going on, your mother-in-law, the money, you know, like, and then the subtext is like, I am not comfortable talking about sex. Please do not even bring it up again. And they don't.
Right. And it's amazing. It is amazing to me that happens. Like, anyway, so
you
froze. A couples counselor, and there are a lot of couples counselors who aren't comfortable talking about sex. So I said there's just a lot of couples counselors that are not comfortable talking about sex. So the fact that you are, and it is, and so when a couple comes in, do you screen everybody? Like, for like what? Like, if somebody's coming in not for a sexual issue, if they think they're not coming in for
absolutely. I always ask about sex in some way. You know, it could be, you know, like, tell me about the strengths of the relationship. I mean, this is not exactly how I talk, but I might say something about, like, what goes well, like your sex life or your, whatever. Like I bring it in. I always
what's working.
What's working, right?
Right.
Or let's say the issue has to do with an illness. And I say, it can take a toll in so many ways. It can take a toll on you sexually. Like I either ask directly, I mention it, I definitely bring it in. Because I want my subtext to read, by the way, we can talk about sex. And certainly if someone says sex, I always say, I hear that you mentioned your sex life, and I think that's an important thing for us to address. Yeah.
So can you, I'm jumping a little bit now because it's like a little bit, it was sort of came up as talking about something else, which is that, one of the things that couples counselors will often say, and I've heard you say this quite a bit also, is that it's the relationship that's your client rather than one of the people in the relationship necessarily. And I feel like that's interesting for people to hear. Can you just speak to that for a minute?
Sure. I usually say it's the couple that's my client.
Okay. Sorry. Yes. Okay. How to be misquoted to your own face. Yes. Anyway.
Way to go. So that is different than individual therapy too, that, you asked about earlier. The couple is really my client, and it's really important to me that they both feel heard, feel, that their voices are incorporated, that it's less about a neutral stance and more about having multiple perspectives in the room and all of them to be valid and validated and respected. So, and that's a little different than just being neutral. Like, I think people get annoyed when people are like, well, it has to be 50-50. And it's like, no, it doesn't.
Oh, you're right. And you're right. Yeah, no, definitely not.
Right. People literally hate that. And yet they don't want to feel that the couples therapist is taking a side either. I remember learning this when I was a trainee at Ackerman, and I was seeing a family, and it was the divorced parents, their teenage child who literally wore their hair like over their face because and the dad's new wife. That's who was in the room. And it was like, and we had this really pretty amazing session. And they came back the next time and they said to me, and it really stayed with me, because they said, for the first time in 10 years, we all agreed on one thing. We all really liked you. And like, they all had a story to tell. And they all felt that in my hearing their story, no one's story had to get negated. There was room for all of it. And so I think that it's just a very powerful experience. So when I say the couple's my client, it's like people really do feel like I can say it, and it's not about my disagreeing or not, but it's really about making space for everyone's narrative. That said, I do want to get to know each person in the couple, so that it's there's the individuals who make up the couple too, and hopefully people feel like I know them personally as well as they they're as a couples therapist.
And if people are thinking about coming in or going into couples therapy, like, is there something you think you could say to them that would make it either easier to make that initial phone call, find the right therapist, make the process easier for them? Like, what would you say?
I would say to reframe it as a strength of the relationship. I can't tell you how many people will say, and even in the days when I was younger and charged less, like, it's so expensive, but like, or like I said, it signaled failure, or it was somehow a negative statement about their relationship. And I think to reframe that into like, no, it's actually a strength to say, when we struggle with something and get help for it, like, that's a good thing. That means that we care enough. I think I often like to say that when people say like relationships are hard work, or that like there's like a somehow like, or compromise, or these heavy words that like feel like they're like have a negative, yeah. And so I like to use words like, it's an investment. It's when you cherish something, you spend time on it, you think about it, you give it consideration, if it matters to you, then you want to take care of it. And so those are like, it's a positive. It's really, when you think of it as, okay, we're struggling, we don't have to struggle this much. We can actually get somebody, we can have a constructive, productive conversation that can help us get to a better place.
I love that so much. I just want you to know I love that so much. And I'm totally guilty of that. I feel like I'm often talking about how relationships are hard work. And you're right. I mean, if you reframe it, relationships are hard work. Let's just be honest. But
relationships are, and also the truth of the matter is that there's no such thing as, especially a lifetime commitment that doesn't hit stumbling blocks or doesn't have its really difficult moments. But to think of like the marriage is like, well, it's always hard work, it just puts like a pall on it or something.
You're totally right. And I think I think that is amazing. I'm going to say, but I want you to finish because you were in the middle of a thought and I totally interrupted you because you were saying, like, I said how to make it easier for couples, and you said a couple should reframe it. And if you don't remember what you were saying, then I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to say.
That's fine, because the other piece I was going to ask, sort of as an adjunct follow-up, that is that I often find that for women, it's harder to drag the husbands in for couples therapy. Do you find that also? Yeah, what do you think about that? And do you have suggestions for that? And
so when it is a heterosexual couple coming in, I sometimes joke that that like my secondary specialty is, because stereotypically the husband or the male partner who doesn't.
Yeah, and we have to talk stereotypes, because I would say 80% of my women patients say, like, that are going to therapy, like they either have to drag their husband or he won't go. Like, it's
Right.
more
So
often.
I always say, look, this is what you have to do. You just say, I'm asking you for 1 hour of your, oh, I know this actually piggybacks what I was going to finish saying. I say, ask for 1 hour, and and it's the money that you're going to spend and 1 hour of your time. And if it feels like it's constructive, productive conversation, then great, we'll make another session. If not, we won't. So the onus is on me in some sense to produce that. And I have enough hubris to think I can.
And you know what? I bet you do. Like,
And the truth is that was what I was going to say, is people should know, like, if the first session feels like a dud, trust that there's other couples therapists out there, and there's many of us who are smart and well trained and well educated, and it's not the right chemistry, and that's okay. Go to
you know what? Shoshana once said to me that we were talking about choosing a therapist, that it may make sense to make 3 first appointments. And I remember listening to that and thinking, oh my God, that is the craziest idea I've ever heard. That's so much time and so much money. But then when I thought about it longer, I thought she was brilliant. Well, I always think she's brilliant, but I thought this was particularly brilliant because you're going to be investing time and money into something. And so you go to 3 couples therapists or 3 therapists and you try them all and you spend the money and the time. So you got 3 hours, 3 wasted, whatever it is. I promise you that at the end of those 3 sessions, you're going to feel really good about the person that you pick. And you're going to feel like
you really get a sense of how that person works, how they think, how they're going to engage with you, how you feel about them, if the chemistry's right. And it is time and money well spent. It really is.
It's so smart, because otherwise people start with one person and they're not sure and they don't know and they keep going because they started with that person. And that's just a terrible way to enter any relationship.
Right. It's so funny. I was once teaching a course in Foundations of Family Therapy. And back in the day, one of the older theories was called paradoxical family therapy, where they would prescribe the symptom and say, like, oh, your daughter's anorexic. I think that she shouldn't eat because she's keeping the family together. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, of course, like they like this idea that somehow they would prescribe the symptom. And this woman in my class was in her 50s, now see that as very young, but she started crying. And I said, like, we were showing some video, and she said, I actually came here when I was in my 20s with my then husband, and they told me that that it looked like this relationship wasn't going to work, and they left and said, look, the experts are saying it's not going to work, and they got divorced. And she said, I'm happily married. I'm like, she said, but like, I actually don't think I had to go through that. And so I'm very, very mindful of, first of all, I know it's going to sound like a crazy way to say it, but like, of how much power therapists have. Like, people think like, well, if their therapist thinks, so I'm very, very mindful never to tell people what to do, how to do it, what's the best way, because I don't think I know. I can help them have a productive conversation so that they can figure out what's best for them. But I think it's really important to feel like, if the person doesn't feel right for you, or you're not happy with what you heard, then chances are this is the wrong therapist for you.
I can't believe it, but our time is basically up, which is insane. I know, like I said, I knew this would happen, because Shoshana and I could talk for hours, and sometimes we do actually. So we just chat about. So is there anything else you would think before, like, we finish up, that you would say to a couple if they're thinking about couples therapy, or that might make it less scary to them? And if not, that's totally fine.
I'm not sure what to say to make it less scary, except, like I said before, just reframing it as a strength. And I have really seen people who I used to see, and then they have, a few years later, they'll come back and say, we should have come back a few months ago. We've been struggling. And literally within a couple sessions, they're just feeling like, oh my God, like, why did we wait? So I would just really say, don't wait. It's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of strength to come in and say, let's address this head on, because, And if it really is true that like there's nothing to do, um, I'm not sure why it's worse off to go to a couples therapist than to live unhappily.
It's so funny because I feel like I spend half my life either saying it or thinking that. Like, I feel like so many of the women who come in, I'm like, I can't believe you lived like this for, 5 years, 10 years. Like, don't wait. Like, the fear is usually so much bigger than the actual act itself. And so somehow coming to couples therapy just feels overwhelming, but it really
Right.
doesn't.
I just want to say one last thing that I remember a couple I saw again, a different one in my training, and they came into my private practice with me, and I've seen them over the years. And but I remember when it was really time to end. I mean, they had done an amazing piece of work. They're like, I literally had people who came to me because they were friends of theirs and said, I don't know what happened in therapy, but like we want some of that. It was so amazing. So, but I thought it was time to end, and they were like, "Oh no, 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 no!" And they really, I mean, so for a while they came every other week, once a month, and they said, some people go for a massage, and some people get their nails done, and for us, this is like a really great place to like dig into things that sometimes it's hard for us to go to on our own. Now they didn't stay with me forever, obviously. I mean, they do come back if they need to, but there was something about that statement about how like even thinking, I'm not saying everyone should go to couples therapy to just have this conversation, but there is something about it that really helps you get to a different level of conversation and a different type of conversation than when it's not facilitated. It's not where we go naturally.
No, no. Honestly, I don't think that's a terrible idea. It was funny when you and I were talking kind of before we went live. I was thinking about saying like most couples should maybe have like a 50,000 mile checkup. Like maybe if we built into the system a couple, you get married and then or you're in a relationship and then 6 months later you have a couples counselor meeting and another 6 months, just because we all could use it. Like no relationship is going to be smooth sailing all the time.
Right.
So anyway, so if you're listening to this, I would highly, and you're thinking about couples therapy, maybe take the plunge because it's really, as Shoshana said, a sign of strength. So we're going to sign off. I'm going to say thank you so much, Shoshana.
Right.
Like, I
Thank you. Thank you
know
for
this was
inviting me.
not your favorite thing to do here. I had to kind of convince Shoshana to do it, but super cool. And I really, really hope that you'll come back again and join us
Okay,
again.
I'd love to. This is great. Thank you so much.
Good night.